The corridors of the citadel were alive with chaos. Sparks rained from the walls as the energy shields faltered under the relentless assault. I could hear the shouts of the palace guards echoing through the halls, their panic thick enough to taste. And yet, even as they fled, abandoning their posts and leaving the corridors unguarded, I pressed forward. One thought propelled me above fear. The Queen was still alive, and I would risk everything to reach her. I had never intended to be a hero. I had joined the Royal Intelligence Service because I believed in order, in protocols, in the silent machinery that kept the Empire functioning. But today, those systems had failed. The enemy, the Valkyrie, had breached the outer defenses with uncanny precision. My training screamed at me to retreat, to regroup, but another voice, smaller yet fiercer, insisted I move. It whispered, "The Queen is your responsibility." When I arrived at the inner sanctum, the scene was worse than I could have imagined. The chamber was torn apart. Crystal panels that had once glowed with serene energy were shattered, their luminescence leaking onto the floor in molten streams. And in the center of the devastation, the Queen's ceremonial throne lay toppled. Yet there she was, kneeling amid the wreckage, her royal robes scorched but intact. Her crown, that fragile band of starlight-infused metal, had slid slightly to one side. She looked at me, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with recognition and a silent plea. I didn't hesitate. I darted across the chamber, the floor beneath me shaking as the citadel's structural integrity faltered. Energy beams lanced from the ceiling, sizzling the air where they struck, but instinct and reflex carried me. Reaching the Queen, I grasped her arm and helped her to her feet. She didn't resist, but her hand trembled ever so slightly. "Your Majesty," I whispered, my voice catching, "we need to move. Now." She nodded, and for the first time, her expression betrayed the faintest hint of vulnerability. Vulnerability that few had ever seen, not even in private audiences. But there was no time for pity. Behind us, the corridors were alive with the sounds of Valkyrie drones, their mechanical legs clattering across the marble floors. The guards had fled. Every one of them. I had to think fast. There was one route I knew, the old maintenance conduits, narrow and winding, leading to the emergency transport docks. I had snuck through them as a cadet, exploring forbidden sections of the citadel, and their labyrinthine paths were etched into my memory. I half carried the Queen, half guided her as we navigated the twisting shafts. Sparks rained from overhead conduits, and the metal walls hummed with residual energy from the destabilized shields. Each step was a gamble, one wrong move, and we could be crushed or incinerated. "Do you trust me?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze swept the length of the passage, taking in the scorched walls and the faint hum of dying power systems. Then, with a quiet resolve that belied the chaos around us, she said, "I have no choice." That was all the permission I needed. We moved quickly, ducking through a narrow hatch as a Valkyrie drone burst into the corridor behind us, its sensors flaring red. I slammed the hatch shut, locking it just in time. The drone's mechanical arm pounded against the metal with a shriek, but it was trapped. For a moment, I allowed myself a fleeting sense of triumph, but the relief was short-lived. The citadel's structure shuddered violently, and I realized the entire complex was on the verge of collapse. I had heard legends of the Queen's lineage surviving the fall of entire star systems, but I had never imagined being part of such a test myself. I glanced at her. She was calm, almost eerily so, but I could feel the heat from her proximity, the subtle tremor in her pulse as we ran. Her resilience was remarkable, and it fueled my own determination. The maintenance conduits led us to the emergency lifts, a series of vertical shafts that descended deep beneath the citadel. Normally, they were automated and required security clearance, but with the main systems failing, the lifts were frozen. I ripped open the panel and began the manual override, my fingers flying over the controls. The Queen watched, silent, her gaze fixed on the flashing panels. Then she spoke softly, "I knew you would come." Her words stopped me. Knew I would come? There was a weight to them, a history I could not yet understand. But there was no time for reflection. I engaged the override, and with a groan of protest, the lift platform shuddered to life. We descended into darkness, the vibrations of the citadel above us echoing through the shaft like distant thunder. I held her close, guiding her as the lift swung perilously from side to side. I could hear debris tumbling into the lower levels, metal screams echoing in the emptiness. When we reached the transport docks, the scene was catastrophic. Half of the ships had been destroyed, hulls torn open, engines screaming and failing. But one vessel remained, a Scout-class starship with its boarding ramp lowered. I dragged the Queen aboard, ignoring her protests about protocol and decorum. The cockpit was illuminated only by emergency lights, casting our faces in harsh red. I keyed the launch sequence, my fingers shaking as the engines roared to life. Then came the final test. The Valkyrie had breached the dock's outer defenses. A massive drone carrier hovered above, its weapons array trained on our small vessel. The Queen placed a hand on my arm. "You must go," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Leave me if necessary. My survival is not worth your life." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to obey, but I could not leave her. Not now. Not after everything. "We leave together," I said. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of fear that no one ever saw. Then she nodded, placing her hand in mine. "Very well. Then we risk everything." The engines flared, the ship leaping from the docks even as the Valkyrie fired. Energy beams cut through the hangar, tearing apart support structures and sending debris spinning. The Queen braced herself, but there was a subtle grace in her movements, a poise even in the face of imminent death. I realized then that the stories of her invincibility were not just legend. They were truth, tempered by courage and willpower. We navigated the wreckage as the citadel began to collapse behind us, twisting metal and fire cascading into the void. I maneuvered the vessel through the chaos, heart hammering in my chest. Every second felt like an eternity, every move a defiance against the inevitability of destruction. And then, finally, we broke through the outer perimeter. The citadel was behind us now, a collapsing fortress of light and metal. I exhaled, feeling the tension drain from my body. The Queen stood beside me, surveying the void of space ahead, her expression unreadable but calm. "You risked everything," she said quietly, almost reverently. "While others fled, you stayed. Why?" I met her gaze. "Because I couldn't do otherwise. You trusted me with more than your life. I couldn't betray that." A silence fell, not awkward, but charged with something unspoken. Then she smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. "Perhaps the Empire is not lost," she said. "Perhaps it has hope yet." The journey back to the fleet was long and tense. Scouts reported the Valkyrie pursuing, but our small vessel, piloted by desperation and sheer will, eluded capture. The Queen issued commands through the emergency comms, rallying loyalists who had survived the initial onslaught. Slowly, piece by piece, the remnants of the Empire regrouped. When we finally landed on the flagship of the Royal Fleet, I expected ceremony, accolades, maybe even recognition for what we had survived. But the Queen's first words to me were simple. "You saved my life." That alone is enough. The rest we will face together. In that moment, I understood the weight of our bond. It was not merely survival. It was trust, forged in fire, in risk, in the decision to stand when all others fled. The Empire had lost much, but it had not lost its heart. Not while the Queen survived. I realized, then, that bravery is not defined by armor or weapons, but by choices made in the face of fear. The guards may have fled, the citadel may have fallen, but in the end, courage had triumphed. And as the Queen turned to address her fleet, her presence commanding even in the shadow of disaster, I knew one undeniable truth. We would rise again, together. The universe could throw worlds at us, could shatter citadels and break empires, but as long as we faced it side by side, the Queen and I, there was no force capable of extinguishing our will. And so, as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the fleet's hull, I felt a sense of purpose I had never known. The Queen survived. And because she survived, so did hope itself. As the fleet assembled, the Queen stepped onto the bridge of the flagship, her presence commanding and calm, yet the weight of what had been lost still lingered in the lines of her face. The stars outside stretched infinitely, a silent witness to both our failure and our survival. I stood beside her, still catching my breath from the chaos we had endured. She turned to me, her eyes steady, and for a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. "You risked everything for me," she said quietly, almost as if afraid the sound might shatter. "While others fled, you stayed. That is courage few possess." I swallowed, not trusting my voice. I didn't choose courage. I chose to protect you. And if I had to do it again, I would. A faint smile touched her lips, the first genuine one I had seen since the attack began. "Then perhaps the Empire has hope yet," she said, her tone resolute. "Not because of walls or armies, but because of people like you. People willing to risk everything." For a long moment, we stood in silence, watching the remnants of the citadel burn like dying stars in the distance. The fleet engines hummed softly, ready to follow her command, ready to rebuild what was shattered. I realized then that survival was not enough. It was what we did with that survival that mattered. She reached for my hand, her touch light but certain. "We will face whatever comes next," she said, "together." And in that moment I understood. The Queen had survived, yes, but the true victory was the bond forged in the fire of impossible odds. Together, we would rise. Together, we would ensure that no enemy, no disaster, could extinguish the heart of our empire. The stars stretched endlessly before us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt hope, brilliant, unwavering, and alive. The Queen survived. And because she survived, so did everything worth fighting for.